UFC Fight Night Song versus Gutierrez. We have a very good card coming up this weekend. Features a lot of great Asian talent that the UFC has to offer. That's primarily because this was originally supposed to take place in Shanghai, but for whatever reason, it is back in Vegas. Either way, I'm going to go through and break down each of these fights, give my predictions on each one, and let's get right into it. We're starting out in the women's strawweight division. It is a fight between Rayanne Amanda and Talita Alencar. Amanda is 14-6 overall, making her UFC debut here. She is the -170 favorite. She's taking on Talita Alencar, who is the +140 underdog and is 4-0-1 overall. Alencar, I was more familiar with going into this because I watched her Dana White Contender Series debut live, and it was somewhat more recent. In that fight, she showed really great grappling. Her wrestling looked fantastic versus her opponent, but she was a lot smaller than the woman she was fighting, and she ended up gassing. I think a lot of that has to do with, obviously, wrestling and grappling is very tiring, but just having to take down a bigger body in that fight, I think expedited her getting tired. She's taking on Rayanne Amanda here, who is more similar to her size. She's like 5'2", where Alencar is 5'1". Amanda lost her Dana White Contender Series debut to Denise Gomes, and she has been submitted in the past. I'm not sure how good her wrestling and grappling is, but she seems to have somewhat of a jiu-jitsu base because she's got quite a few submission wins under her belt. Alencar, on the other hand, I think she's just a bona fide stud when it comes to grappling, and I think she's one of these longtime jiu-jitsu players who's kind of came into MMA late, but from what I've seen, Alencar looks really good, and she's plus money here. I think she wins this one by submission. I think if this turns into a grappling contest, she is going to have the advantage, so that's why Talita Alencar by submission is the pick. Our next fight is a flyweight fight. We're getting possibly the best prospect on this entire card, at least on this undercard. It is Tatsuro Taira taking on Carlos Hernandez. Taira is the -575 favorite in this one. He's 14-0 overall, 4-0 in the UFC. Hernandez, on the other hand, is 2-1 in the UFC, and he's coming in at a +400 underdog. Taira, for my money, is a top 5 prospect at flyweight right now, if not being just a top 5, just being top 5 overall right now. His wrestling is super smooth. I think he's somewhat more unappreciated than Muhammad Mokaev, who has a kind of a similar skill set. And that's just because he hasn't had as big of fights and as strong of opponents yet. But I think possibly after this fight, we're going to be talking about him like you hear people talking about Mokaev. He's one of these, he's got really phenomenal wrestling, perhaps the best in the division. He takes people down and then he just climbs on their backs, and there's really nothing they can do over that. He's got a couple submission wins already in the UFC over Vergara and Aguilar. Obviously, the biggest question mark with Taira is what happens if he can't get the takedown, and that's something that he really hasn't been able, or hasn't had to address yet, because he's been able to take down each of his opponents. His opponent here, Hernandez, is pretty solid. He's well-rounded. He's coming off of a slam KO in like the last 3 seconds of the fight, but he's been taken down before in the tape that I watched on him, and he had guys climbing on his back, getting him into positions that Taira, I think, would finish pretty quickly. So I think Taira gets a submission win here and starts to really ascend those flyweight rankings. After that, we have a bantamweight fight between Luana Santos and Stephanie Egger. Santos is the -155 favorite. She is 1-0 in the UFC, 6-1 overall. She's taking on Egger, who is the +130 underdog and is 3-2 in her last 5 fights in the UFC. Santos, it is worth mentioning that she did miss weight pretty significantly. I think she came in at like 140, so like 4 pounds over the limit. She is coming off of a win over Juliana Miller in her most recent fight. That fight was at flyweight, and she finished Miller in that fight and really pretty much dominated that from start to finish. 4 of her 6 career wins do come by finish, and she's only 23 years old, so does not have that much experience, despite being really powerful, though, and showing a lot of promise. Egger, on the other hand, is on the other side of the spectrum. She's 35 years old, been in the game for a while. She made her amateur debut in 2015, which was 4 years prior to Santos's. And really, if you look at Luana Santos's losses, they're all against really good opponents. Tracy Cortez, Maria Buena Silva, Irina Alexeva. So she's been in there with a lot of the top talent in the UFC. She's got good wins over Haqparast and Jessica Rose Clark. I'm taking Egger by decision in this one. This is, if you've been watching my videos, you know my philosophy. When it comes to these women's divisions, I think experience is so significant, perhaps even more so than the men's divisions. That's just what I've seen. So when you have someone like Santos coming in with only 1 UFC fight, I'm giving Egger a strong edge in that one. The next fight on the card is a featherweight fight between Steve Garcia and Melquizael Costa. Garcia is 3-2 in his last 5 fights and is the plus 215 underdog. Costa is 1-1 in the UFC and is the minus 265 favorite. Cool matchup here between southpaws who just like to stand and strike. Garcia is definitely a finisher. All 6 of his last 6 wins have all come by KO. Super impressive. Although he's not on a 6-fight win streak. He's a guy who throws really good body shots, and if he connects, can really hurt guys. But he does leave himself vulnerable and he gets dropped a lot. Maheshate and Nerda Bianche, I just can't even pronounce his name, both dropped him. Maheshate flatlined him. Costa, on the other hand, he's the more technical striker. He's got that sniper approach. He's going to kick at range rather than try to get up super close and make it dirty. He throws a lot of really good body kicks that just drains guys' gas tanks. He really beat up Austin Lingo in their last fight, despite losing his debut versus Thiago Moises. But I won't knock him too much for that. It was up a weight class and against a guy like Moises, who was really able to just grapple him and control him that way. Garcia KO at plus 350 is really not bad value. I mean, if you're going to bet on Garcia, you might as well bet KO. But I think Costa, just being more technical, is going to give him the edge here. I think he wins this one by decision. The next fight, we have another very highly touted. It is HyunSung taking on Shannon Ross. HyunSung is the minus 600 favorite here. He's 8-0 overall, 1-0 in the UFC. Shannon Ross is the plus 425 underdog. He is 1-4 in his last 5 fights. The philosophy is simple here. We fade Shannon Ross pretty much always, especially against a guy like HyunSung, who's super athletic and is a dangerous finisher. Shannon Ross has gotten KO'd twice in a row. 4 times in a row, twice in a row in the UFC. I just don't think he's on the same level as most of these guys in the UFC. He lost his Dana White Contender Series bout and somehow just, went through the side door to get into the UFC in the first place. So I think Sung finishes him real quickly. I think he only needs a round to get it done here. The next fight is a welterweight fight between Song Kenan and Kevin Jousset. Song Kenan is 20-7 overall, 3-2 in his last 5 fights, and is the plus 125 underdog. Jousset is 9-2 overall and 1-0 in the UFC, and he's the minus 150 favorite. Song Kenan, probably best known as the guy who dropped Ian Gary. He was pretty much getting pieced up that entire fight. You could tell that Ian Gary was leaps and bounds ahead of him in the striking department, but Gary got, a little too comfortable, and he hit him with a left hook that almost put him out. I mean, it was pretty crazy that Gary walked away from that. But yeah, that does kind of sum up Kenan. He's a guy who's maybe not the most technical striker, but he's pretty good at countering. That's really where he's going to get most of his work done. He's going to look to counter people rather than, lead the dance. But after that fight, he took on Rolando Bedoya, a guy who I thought was going to steamroll him, and he showed a lot better striking in that fight and, pretty much controlled that fight in all facets versus Rolando Bedoya. Jousset, on the other hand, I actually think he's pretty similar to Song Kenan. They're both kind of stiff. I mean, Jousset is stiff as a board. He just stands straight up. He's got a judo background, and he kind of looks like what you'd expect a judo fighter to look like. And yeah, the guy's just stiff, and it's worked for him. He's compiled a pretty good record, and he won his debut comfortably versus Kiefer something. Crosby, I think his name was. And I think just Kenan, just based on the eye test, his striking just looks a lot cleaner. Jousset is definitely powerful, but I think Kenan's going to be the more skilled striker here, and I foresee this fight taking place on the feet for the most part. I think Kenan wins the decision here. Our first fight on the main card is a middleweight fight between JunYong Park and Andre Muniz. JunYong Park, of course, he's the Iron Turtle. He's the minus 175 favorite here. 3-2 in his last 5. Muniz is the plus 145 underdog, and he is 3-2 in his last 5. Park I think he's pretty underrated among the middleweights. He's compiled a pretty solid record in the UFC. His only losses are to Anthony Hernandez and RoboCop, which, RoboCop, unbelievably dangerous. Anthony Hernandez might be the single most underrated guy at 185. He's not very big for the division, but it hasn't gotten him into too much trouble up until this point. But when he's standing in there, he looks visibly smaller than a lot of the opponents he comes up against. But yeah, he's got an all-around skill set. He's gotten a few submission wins as of late. And he's a guy who looks like he can just kind of beat you a lot of different ways. Muniz, on the other hand, is a lot more one-dimensional. He's a jiu-jitsu guy, and he really was looked at as kind of like the boogeyman at 185 for a little bit. He was on a 5-0 win streak, beating Jacare Souza, Uriah Hall, a few other guys. But he's coming off of back-to-back losses versus Brendan Allen and Paul Craig. Those are two of the best jiu-jitsu fighters in pretty much in the UFC, certainly at the higher weights. And I think they were just bad matchups for Muniz. I think this matchup versus JunYong Park is actually going to be a lot more advantageous. He's going to be bigger. I think JunYong Park is going to struggle with the length of Muniz, and I think if Muniz can take him down, which we've seen Park get taken down by guys like RoboCop and Hernandez, I think if Muniz gets him in that position, it's going to be his world, and JunYong Park isn't going to really be able to deal with it. So I'm taking Muniz by sub. I think he's too talented to go on a 3-fight skid, and this is just the win he'll need to stay relevant at the middleweight division. Our next fight is a flyweight fight between Tim Elliott and Sumudaerji. Elliott is 3-2 in his last 5. He's the minus 130 favorite. Sumudaerji is 3-2 as well and is the plus 110 underdog. Pretty close on the lines. Sumudaerji, he is coming off of probably the craziest 2-round fight of the year versus Matt Schnell. Absolutely chaotic fight. Wobbled Schnell a few times. Almost had him out of there, on several different occasions. Somehow he just ends up on his back, and Schnell, I believe, KOs him. Or he got him into a triangle. Absolute chaos. You should definitely go back and watch that if you haven't seen it. But Sumudaerji is a guy who kind of thrives in chaos. He's a powerful striker, but I don't think he's grappling. Despite having a few submission wins, his wrestling doesn't seem to be very good, and he does find himself on his back. Tim Elliott, on the other hand, he's been around forever. He's so experienced. He's got, a bunch of UFC fights under his belt. He is coming off of a loss to Makhachev, but Makhachev has a much better skill set for dealing with Tim Elliott than Sumudaerji. Tim Elliott is a guy who's really tough to hit, and that's where Sumudaerji wants to be landing hard shots and getting you out of there. I think he's going to get frustrated. I think Tim Elliott's going to frustrate Sumudaerji and win a decision here. I think he's going to be able to use his grappling and combine that with his striking to just kind of control him and frustrate him a lot and win this one on the cards. Next up is a lightweight fight between Nasrat Haqparast and Jamie Mullarkey. This is a good matchup between two strikers, two guys who've had up and down UFC careers. Mullarkey definitely. You watch him fight, and he really passes the eye test. Like everything he does looks really good, but he's just been chinned a few times. Most recently, Muhammad Naimov KO'd him in a fight that Mullarkey was pretty much dominating in, and was looking great up until that point. So his chin is definitely a bit suspect, but his striking is super clean. He's taking on Nasrat, who is coming off of back-to-back wins versus John McDessie and Landon Quinones. Quinones, and both these guys beat John McDessie recently. Landon Quinones, he's a young guy who I don't think was really ready for the UFC. He lost in the Ultimate Fighter. Pretty much got dominated and tough, and just sort of wound up in a fight anyway. Probably a fight that he was not ready for. But in some of the pure stand-up fights that Nasrat Haqparast has had versus more skilled strikers on his level, like Bobby Green and Hooker, he's lost. So I'm going to take Mullarkey to win this one by decision. You're getting plus money with him, and I think he's got enough power to sort of deter Nasrat and enough skill as well to find enough shots without taking a bunch of shots. So Nasrat is going to be the pick there. Moving along, we have a light heavyweight fight as our co-main event. It is Anthony Smith taking on Khalil Rountree. Smith is the plus 190 underdog, 3-2 in his last 5. Rountree is the minus 235 favorite and is 4-1 in his last 5. Smith is replacing Murzakanov, who was originally scheduled to fight Rountree. Kind of bummed that we're not getting to see that, because stylistically, I think that would just be a blast to see Murzakanov, another shorter light heavyweight, similar to Khalil Rountree, who just kind of wings punches. That would have been a lot of fun. But Anthony Smith's coming into this one. He's riding a win over Ryan Spann most recently. Before that, he did have that loss to Johnny Walker, and Ankalaev did sort of run through him. But you look at the losses that Anthony Smith has had throughout his career, and you can't name a single bad fighter who's beat him. He's losing to guys like Thiago Santos back when Thiago was beating everybody, Glover Teixeira, John Jones. So, he's got a lot of losses, but he's been up there with the elite 205ers for so long. That's just, I think he's a tier below the elite of the elite, but he's a guy who's stuck around at that, high tier of the division for so long for a reason. And he just finds ways to win fights. He's going to come in with a cerebral approach, because he's not bigger than you. He's probably not faster. He's probably not stronger. But he's cerebral. He just knows ways to win fights, knows how to take advantage of weaknesses, and he's taking on a guy in Khalil Rountree who's, I guess, probably not the most complete fighter. His stand-up is definitely among the best in the division. He's riding a 4-fight win streak for a reason. He's been knocking guys out. And he's a guy who's, he's got that Muay Thai experience that you can definitely tell his fight versus Carl, who is it? I forget his name. Carl, it's not coming to me. One of the worst beatings you'll see, though. And he's coming off of a win versus Chris Dawkins, who was moving down to 205. But before that streak, I mean, he lost to Jan Kutilaba and Marcin Prachnio. Not really the two of the best guys, two of the more skilled guys in the division. I think Rountree's shown that his grappling really isn't up to par, and if you can take advantage of that, you can beat him. I think Smith finds a way to do that. I think he gets a KO in this one. I think he takes down Khalil Rountree and is able to find enough ground and pound to get Rountree out of there. I know he's really not going to want to play any games with Rountree on the feet because that would definitely give Rountree the advantage 10 times out of 10. So I do think Smith finds a way to take him down and gets Rountree on his back and just does not let him up and gets a stoppage that way. Finally, we have our bantamweight main event. It is Song Yadong taking on Chris Gutierrez. Song is the minus 400 favorite. 4-1 his last 5. Gutierrez is 4-1 his last 5 as well and is the plus 300 underdog. Crazy to me. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but these odds definitely surprised me. Let me know if this is what you guys were expecting as well, for the odds to be that lopsided. I would have thought it'd be more minus 210, 220 for Yadong. So the EV fiend in me is off the rip leaning Chris Gutierrez. But let's talk about Song Yadong because this does feel like the UFC is trying to make this a showcase fight for him. He's definitely, for my money, one of the top prospects at 135. He's been fighting some good guys as of late. Corey Sandhagen, who he definitely did give some troubles despite losing that one because of a brutal cut that just sliced open his eye. But if you look at the first round of that fight, I thought he won the first round. His stand-up game is pretty crazy. He's got a lot of power in his hands, and he's just super athletic. And he's coming off of a win versus Ricky Simone where he was able to pretty much neutralize everything Simone was trying to do. Dropped him a few times before finally getting a KO towards the end of the fight. But he really just showed the complete package in that, being able to fend off takedowns or get up off his back if he did get taken down, and then dominating on the feet. Gutierrez, on the other hand, he's coming off of a win versus Alencar. Prior to that, he did have a close loss to Pedro Muniz, a fight that he did get dropped in, but I don't think he was as hurt as people were saying. He's never been KO'd, and Pedro definitely caught him super clean with an overhand right, where he just got up in Gutierrez's grill and really stunned him in the first round. But yeah, I don't think Gutierrez was super hurt by that, but Muniz was able to just kind of edge him out on the feet and win the decision that way. So I think Gutierrez's stock went down significantly based on that fight, even though, Pedro Muniz is super experienced and he doesn't get a lot of wins, but he's one of the, he's been in the top 15 bantamweight for so long for a reason. So I didn't take too much stock away from Chris Gutierrez as I think a lot of others did. And I think that's why we are seeing that plus 300 underdog line. Gutierrez, he has great kicks. He's going to want to leg kick you, all day and then come up high with a high kick. His hands, I think, are lacking. He's got, he likes to throw the spinning back fist, which I think the energy consumption ratio to, effectiveness is not great, and most people are not going to like people throwing that strike. He's landed it enough where I think he's sort of earned that right to, he's had so much success with it where it's you're not going to tell him to stop throwing it. But outside of that, we've never really seen him get too crazy with his hands. I think that's going to be the biggest difference maker. Yadong's just got cleaner, faster hands and definitely more power. I'm taking Yadong to get a decision win here. Gutierrez never been KO'd, and I can see him beating up Yadong's legs quite a bit, where, you know, he's going to slow him down a little bit. But I think the power of Yadong is going to give Gutierrez a lot of problems here. It's going to sort of, I could see Gutierrez being a bit hesitant to throw the hands after he sort of feels what's coming back at him from Yadong. And Yadong wins on the cards that way. But that is the card right there, all wrapped up. Had a pretty good week last week. Arman Sarukian got me the win, which is super big. Pretty excited for this card. Let me know your guys' picks down below. This is Phone Home MMA signing out.